In the early hours of 1943, the German High Command was in panic. After the failure of the Battle of Kursk, the Red Army began advancing rapidly, pushing German forces ever farther west. But Hitler believed he still had a plan. He ordered the construction of a massive defensive line in the east, a fortified barrier along the Dnieper River. He was convinced the Wehrmacht could halt the Soviet advance there and buy time for a decisive counterstroke. Only a few months later, everything went wrong. The Red Army forced the river, shattered the defenses, and continued its drive westward. In this video, we will look at Germany's last real chance to stop the Soviet advance in the east, examine why Hitler ignored his generals, why the Eastern Wall turned out to be so weak, and how its collapse broke the Führer himself. By early August 1943, Germany had reached a critical turning point. Its final attempt to regain the initiative during Operation Citadel at Kursk had ended in complete failure. The blow on which Hitler had effectively staked Germany's future victory was crushed by the Red Army in barely a week. German commanders were forced to urgently consider how to prevent this defeat from becoming a total catastrophe. By that moment, the condition of the German army had already seriously deteriorated. Thousands of tanks and aircraft had been lost, along with nearly 500,000 soldiers, losses that Germany found increasingly difficult to replace. Worse still, many of the dead were experienced officers and veterans who had been fighting on the Eastern Front since 1941. And just as the Wehrmacht struggled to hold the Eastern Front, Germany suffered another blow in southern Europe. The Allies landed in Sicily, forcing Berlin to divert forces southward, even if only a small portion compared to the vast scale of the Eastern Front. By August, even Hitler understood that stopping the Soviet advance without extreme measures was impossible. On August 11th, he ordered the construction of a massive defensive line intended to halt the Red Army and give Germany time to prepare a counteroffensive. This line, in which the German command placed enormous hopes, became known as the Eastern Wall or the Panther Line. Within weeks, it became clear how misguided this decision was. After a short operational pause following Kursk, Soviet forces launched a massive offensive. 5 fronts, stretching from Chernihiv to the Sea of Azov, began coordinated operations designed to completely crush German defenses. For the German command, this came as a shock. After Kursk, Hitler expected the Red Army to need until autumn to recover. Although the initial Soviet attack in the Donbass in early August failed, it forced Manstein to urgently plug gaps by redeploying forces from Belgorod, exactly where Soviet command was preparing its next strike. During Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev, the Red Army liberated Belgorod and Kharkov, forcing Manstein to move troops from the Donbass toward Kharkov. As a result, Germany was unable to establish a stable defensive line in either sector. An additional and unpleasant surprise for the Germans was the sudden surge in partisan activity. From mid-August onward, thousands of partisan groups began systematically blowing up railways, bridges, and junctions. According to German data, over 200,000 rails were damaged in just the first month, paralyzing transport on major lines. Some sections had to be repaired multiple times per week. Despite brutal anti-partisan reprisals, the Germans never regained reliable control over the railway network. To German commanders, this looked like a sudden crisis, but in reality, it was the result of long-developing processes that had gone unnoticed in official reports. History shows that such hidden signals often determine the outcome of wars. On September 7th, anticipating an inevitable retreat, German command issued orders to apply scorched-earth tactics. Bridges, warehouses, rail hubs, and anything that could aid Soviet advance were destroyed. German forces also forcibly evacuated male civilians, believing they would otherwise be mobilized into the Red Army. By mid-September, it became obvious the front was on the verge of collapse. The Red Army advanced so rapidly that German units barely managed to retreat. On September 15th, Hitler finally authorized withdrawal to the Dnieper, to the eastern wall, now seen as Germany's last chance to stabilize the situation. The Dnieper, the third largest river in Europe, was meant to become an insurmountable barrier. But first, it became an obstacle for the Germans themselves. With limited crossings along a 700-kilometer front, retreating armies piled up in massive columns waiting to cross. Each unit often depended on only one or two crossings, creating critical vulnerabilities. Although German forces managed to move most units to the western bank, the time lost during the crossing immediately worked against them. Soviet armies followed close behind, reaching the river almost simultaneously. Hitler was initially satisfied. He believed the Wehrmacht had preserved its strength and could finally stop the Red Army. More importantly, holding right bank Ukraine meant retaining access to vital resources, iron or manganese and non-ferrous metals, essential for German industry. Losing these areas would cripple steel, ammunition, and armored vehicle production. Even more crucial was oil. Beyond the Dnieper lay the gateway to Eastern Europe and the Romanian oil fields of Ploiești, one of Germany's last major fuel sources. As long as the Eastern Wall held, Soviet forces were blocked from Romania. But reality diverged sharply from Hitler's expectations. By the time German forces reached the Dnieper, there was simply not enough time to build a solid defense along the entire river. Unlike the Atlantic Wall, constructed with vast amounts of concrete and forced labor, serious fortifications existed only at a few key locations, near Kremenchuk, Zaporizhia, and Nikopol. Nevertheless, on September 23rd, Soviet units established their first bridgehead on the western bank. By September 30th, 12 Soviet armies had already forced the Dnieper. German headquarters was stunned. Wehrmacht planners believed Soviet forces would need weeks, if not months, to prepare such an operation. What they failed to realize was that Soviet command was fully aware of these assumptions. Instead of lengthy preparations, Soviet troops were ordered to cross immediately, without waiting for reserves. To boost morale, the first soldiers to reach the western bank were promised decorations. The price was enormous. With almost no preparation, troops crossed the river on barrels, logs, doors, anything that could float. Heavy equipment and artillery crossed slowly, leaving infantry to hold bridgeheads under brutal counterattacks. Losses were catastrophic. Yet the plan worked. Bridgeheads were seized before the Germans could reinforce their defenses. To further disrupt German countermeasures, Soviet command launched a risky airborne operation on September 24th. Intended to sow chaos behind German lines, it turned into one of the most disastrous Soviet operations of the war. Poor navigation scattered paratroopers across vast areas. Some dropped into the Dnieper or onto friendly positions. The operation failed completely and became the last major Soviet airborne assault of the Eastern Front. Holding the bridgeheads proved as deadly as capturing them. German forces launched relentless counterattacks, supported by artillery and airstrikes. Supplies could often be delivered only at night. Many Soviet divisions were reduced to 20 to 30% of their authorized strength. Despite this, the bridgeheads held. German reserves were exhausted in futile attempts to eliminate them. By mid-October, Soviet forces amassed sufficient strength near the lower Dnieper to launch major offensives. German command knew a major strike was coming, but could not determine where. Rapid Soviet advances pushed German forces back over 100 kilometers, approaching Kryvyi-Rih. On October 23, Dnipropetrovsk fell. Manstein rushed reserves and launched counterattacks that temporarily halted the Red Army and even regained some ground. But this weakened German defenses elsewhere. A breakthrough on the Malachna River cut off Army Group A in Crimea, enraging Hitler. Losing Crimea reopened the threat to Romanian oil fields, a nightmare scenario. By December, it was clear the lower Dnieper could not be held. Soviet bridgeheads became launch pads for new offensives. Near Kyiv, German positions initially seemed stable. Soviet attacks from the Buchanan bridgehead failed repeatedly. German command focused south until November 3. That day, the Red Army launched a massive offensive from the small Lutez bridgehead. German intelligence completely missed the buildup. 3 Soviet armies broke through, encircled Kyiv, and liberated the city on November 6 in just 3 days. The main reason was a catastrophic German intelligence failure. Soviet command secretly transferred the 3rd Guards Tank Army from Buchanan to Lutez under strict camouflage. Diversionary attacks pinned German reserves in the south. Even after Kyiv fell, the Soviet advance continued. Fastov fell on November 7, Zhytomyr on November 13. Manstein counterattacked and temporarily retook Zhytomyr, but lacked the strength to restore the front. By winter, initiative firmly belonged to the Red Army. Hitler blamed his generals and dismissed Hermann Hoth. The Eastern Wall, meant to halt Bolshevism in Europe, collapsed in just 3 months. In late December, Soviet forces resumed their offensive, pushing German armies farther west. Zhytomyr was liberated again by New Year's Eve. By January 1944, the Red Army reached western Ukraine. The last major German stronghold along the Dnieper was the Korsun salient. In January 1944, Soviet forces encircled it. Hitler forbade retreat. The result was disaster. Only about half the encircled troops escaped, without heavy equipment. The rest were killed or captured. Simultaneously, Soviet troops captured Kryvyi-Rih and Nikopol, depriving Germany of vital manganese supplies. This defeat was more devastating than Kursk. Germany lost Ukraine's industry and opened the road to Romania, Hungary, and the Balkans. Finally, the Battle of the Dnieper broke Hitler himself. None of his defensive plans collapsed so quickly. After this, he lost trust in his generals, increasingly retreating into fantasies of Allied disunity. The Eastern Wall, meant to stop the Red Army, held for just 3 months. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and watch how Germany later lost Army Group Center in Operation Bagration. Links in the description. This was Dima. Goodbye.